The Galactic Council had seen many species rise and fall across the stars. In their grand marble halls on Nexus Prime, representatives from 200 civilized worlds gathered to discuss the newest threat to their carefully maintained peace. The emergency session had been called after disturbing reports reached the Outer Rim colonies. Ambassador Zethkar of the Veltari Empire stood at the center podium, his crystalline skin shimmering with anxiety. Behind him, a holographic display showed the devastation on mining world Kepler 442b. Massive craters scarred the planet's surface where peaceful settlements once thrived. The attackers had left no survivors. Honored colleagues, Zethkar's voice resonated through the chamber's translation matrix. We face an unprecedented crisis. The Devourers have returned after 5,000 years of silence. Our long-range scouts report their swarm ships moving through the Andromeda corridor, consuming everything in their path. Murmurs of fear rippled through the assembly. The Devourers were nightmare creatures from ancient galactic history, a race of insectoid beings that strip-mined entire worlds for resources, leaving behind only lifeless rocks. They had nearly conquered the galaxy once before, stopped only by a coalition of the most powerful civilizations working together. Chancellor Mordun of the Aquatic Federation raised a tentacled appendage. Our military strategists estimate we have perhaps 6 standard months before they reach the core worlds. Even with our combined fleets, the mathematics are grim. They outnumber us 3-1. The chamber erupted in panicked discussions. Species that had been rivals for centuries suddenly found themselves clinging to each other in shared terror. The proud warrior clans of Drakmar spoke in hushed tones with the peaceful philosophers of New Athens. Everyone understood what was at stake. High Counselor HFY, an ancient being whose species had witnessed the first Devourer invasion, called for silence with a sonic pulse that made the air itself vibrate. Her words carried the weight of millennia. There may be one option we have not considered. The Border Scouts have detected signs of a new species in the outer spiral arm. They call themselves humans, and early contacts suggest they possess unusual military capabilities. A collective gasp filled the chamber. First contact with unknown species during wartime was incredibly risky. The humans could be allies, enemies, or something far worse than the Devourers themselves. But desperation makes even the most cautious beings consider dangerous options. What do we know about these humans? Asked Commander Velth of the Starforged Republic, his mechanical voice cutting through the tension. HFY gestured to her aide, who activated a new holographic display. Blurry images appeared showing bipedal creatures with pale skin and strange clothing. Intelligence is limited, but what we have learned is disturbing. They appear to originate from a Class 12 death world, a planet so hostile that no civilized species should be able to evolve there. Gravity twice our standard, atmospheric composition that would poison most of us, and weather patterns that regularly destroy settlements. The chamber fell silent. Class 12 death worlds were theoretical nightmares used to scare younglings. No known species had ever evolved on anything worse than Class 7. The fact that an intelligent civilization had emerged from such a hellscape defied everything they understood about evolution and survival. Furthermore, HFY continued, preliminary observations suggest they wage war against each other for recreation. Their entertainment media celebrates conflict, and they voluntarily engage in activities that would traumatize our most elite soldiers. They leap from aircraft for pleasure, deliberately enter burning buildings, and compete in contests involving physical violence. Representative Culmore of the Harmony Collective, a species known for their absolute pacifism, began to tremble visibly. Surely you're not suggesting we invite these creatures into our space? They sound more dangerous than the Devourers themselves. But Ambassador Zethkar stepped forward, his crystalline features reflecting the chamber's lights as he spoke. Perhaps that's exactly what we need. The Devourers have never faced anything like this. Every species they've encountered follows predictable patterns of civilization. We build cities, form governments, create art, and when threatened, we fight in organized formations with established tactics. What if we introduced chaos into their perfect system? The debate that followed lasted for 18 hours. Some argued for immediate military mobilization using conventional forces. Others suggested attempting diplomatic contact with the Devourers, despite their historically complete lack of interest in negotiation. But, as reports continued arriving from the outer colonies, each one showing the inexorable advance of the swarm, the impossible option began to seem reasonable. Finally, a vote was called. The measure passed by the narrowest margin in Council history, 101 votes in favor, 99 against. The Galactic Council would attempt first contact with humanity and offer them a desperate bargain, help defend the galaxy, and earn a place among the civilized stars. As the representatives filed out of the chamber, many wondered if they had just voted to save their civilization or doom it to something worse than extinction. The humans were coming, and nobody had any idea what that truly meant for the galaxy. High Counselor XYDHera remained behind, staring at the star charts showing human space. In her long life, she had seen the rise and fall of dozens of civilizations. Something deep in her ancient mind whispered that this decision would change everything. The question was whether any of them would survive to see what came next. The message probes were already being prepared for launch toward the Sol system. Soon, the humans would know that they were not alone in the universe, and that the galaxy needed them to do what they did best: fight impossible odds with impossible courage. Admiral Sarah Chun stood on the observation deck of the UES Defiance, watching Earth shrink to a blue dot behind them. 3 weeks had passed since the alien message arrived, and humanity was still reeling from the revelation that they weren't alone. The message had been simple but desperate: an entire galactic civilization under threat from an ancient enemy, begging for Earth's help. The response from Earth's governments had been swift and unanimous for the first time in human history. If there was a fight to be had, especially one against seemingly impossible odds, humanity would be there. Within 72 hours, the largest military fleet in human history had been assembled and launched toward the coordinates provided by the aliens. "Admiral," called Lieutenant Torres from the communications station, "we're receiving a transmission from the alien vessel. They're requesting permission to come aboard." Chen nodded grimly. The aliens had been following them for 2 days now, maintaining a respectful distance while sending increasingly frantic updates about the approaching threat. Their ship was sleek and beautiful, like a work of art floating through space. It looked nothing like the brutal, angular vessels of humanity's fleet. "Grant permission. Have them escorted to Conference Room Alpha, and make sure our translators are ready." An hour later, Chen found herself face to face with the strangest being she had ever encountered. Ambassador Zethkar looked like a walking crystal sculpture, his transparent skin revealing flowing patterns of light beneath. He was accompanied by 2 other aliens, a tentacled creature that reminded her of an octopus, and something that looked like a cross between a mantis and a robot. "Greetings, Admiral Chun." Zethkar spoke through a translation device that made his voice sound hollow and musical. "I am honored to make first contact between our species, though I wish the circumstances were more pleasant. I must express our deep gratitude for humanity's rapid response to our plea." Chun studied the alien carefully. Despite the strange appearance, she could read fear in his posture, the way he held himself rigid, how his companions kept glancing at each other. These weren't conquerors or manipulators. They were terrified refugees asking for help. "Tell me about these Devourers," Chun said, leaning forward across the conference table. "I want to know everything: their technology, their tactics, their weaknesses." The briefing that followed painted a picture of an enemy unlike anything humanity had ever faced. The Devourers were a hive mind species that consumed entire planets, converting the raw materials into more ships and more soldiers. They didn't negotiate, didn't take prisoners, and didn't stop until everything was gone. They've destroyed 17 colonies in the past 2 months, the tentacled being, introduced as Chancellor Mordun, explained through gurgling sounds that the translator struggled with. "Our most powerful weapons barely scratch their hull armor. Their ships regenerate damage faster than we can inflict it." The third alien, Commander VLTH, projected holographic displays showing the Devourer fleet. Chen studied the images with a professional eye, noting formations and ship designs. What she saw made her smile in a way that made all 3 aliens shift uncomfortably. "They fight in perfect formations," she observed. "Identical ships, identical tactics, everything coordinated for maximum efficiency." That's their weakness. Zethkar's crystalline features flickered with confusion. I don't understand. Their coordination is what makes them so deadly. No species has ever broken their battle formations. Chen stood and walked to the viewing port, looking out at her own fleet. The ships were mismatched, some sleek and fast, others massive and heavily armored. They flew in seemingly chaotic patterns, each captain adapting to their crew's strengths and their ship's capabilities. You've been fighting them like they're a military force, she said without turning around. But they're not. They're a machine, and machines have predictable responses to specific inputs. You've been trying to out-efficiency an efficiency engine. That's impossible. She turned back to face the aliens, and something in her expression made them all lean back unconsciously. It was the look of a predator who had just spotted prey. Humans don't fight efficiently. We fight dirty. We break rules that don't exist yet and make up new ones in the middle of battle. We specialize in chaos, and chaos is the one thing their hive mind can't predict or counter. The next several hours were spent reviewing tactical data and human military doctrine. The aliens grew increasingly disturbed as Chun explained concepts like guerrilla warfare, suicide attacks, and deliberate friendly fire to confuse enemy sensors. These weren't just military tactics to humanity. They were art forms, refined over millennia of constant warfare. Your species fights itself for practice? Mordun asked, his tentacles writhing in what Chun had learned was a sign of extreme agitation. We fight ourselves for breakfast, Chun replied casually. Competition is how we improve. Every war teaches us something new about killing things that don't want to die. Commander Velth's mechanical voice crackled with static as he processed this information. The psychological profiles suggest your species finds conflict enjoyable. Chun grinned, and all three aliens flinched. Let me tell you something about humans. We're the only species insane enough to look at something trying to kill us and think, I wonder how fast I can kill it back. We invented sports that can cripple participants. We climb mountains because they're there, and we keep predators as pets because we think they're cute. She pulled up Earth's historical records, showing footage of human warriors throughout history. Vikings charging in a battle while laughing, samurai choosing death over dishonor, soldiers throwing themselves on grenades to save their comrades. The aliens watched in horrified fascination. Your species possesses a concept we've never encountered, Zethkar said slowly. You call it courage, but our translation matrix struggles with the meaning. It appears to involve deliberately choosing danger when safer options exist. That's not courage, Chin corrected. That's Tuesday. Courage is when we're terrified and do it anyway because someone needs to and we happen to be there. She paused, looking each alien in the eye. You want to know why we came out here to help you? Because bullies piss us off, and these devourers sound like the biggest bullies in the galaxy. As the meeting concluded, Chin outlined humanity's battle plan. It was insane by galactic standards, a series of seemingly suicidal attacks designed to confuse and fragment the devourer formations. The alien fleet would provide support, but the humans would spearhead the assault. One last question, Zethkar said as they prepared to leave. What happens if this plan fails? What if the devourers adapt to your tactics? Chin's grin became absolutely feral. Then, we'll try something even crazier. We've got 5,000 years of military history to draw from, and every single page is written in blood and bad decisions that somehow worked out. As the aliens departed, Chun turned to her senior staff. Ladies and gentlemen, we've got ourselves a proper fight. Signal the fleet. It's time to show the galaxy what Deathworlders can do when we're properly motivated. The stars ahead held an enemy that had terrorized the galaxy for millennia. But they had never faced anything like humanity, and humanity had never backed down from challenge. The Devourers were about to learn why civilized species feared the dark corners of space where impossible things lived and thrived. The first engagement happened in the Kepler 438 system, where a massive Devourer hive ship was systematically stripping the fourth planet. The alien coalition fleet hung back at the system's edge, their beautiful vessels maintaining perfect formation as they watched the human ships approach the enemy. Captain Maria Santos piloted her fighter squadron through the asteroid belt, using the tumbling rocks as cover. Her ship, the Razor's Edge, was built for speed and violence rather than beauty. Behind her flew 19 other pilots, each one a volunteer who had grown up dreaming of dogfights among the stars. "Contact in 30 seconds, her targeting officer announced. "Jesus, that thing is huge. It's got to be 20 kilometers long." Santos studied the massive vessel through her cockpit display. The Devourer hive ship looked like a mechanical virus, all sharp angles and pulsing biomechanical components. Smaller fighter craft swarmed around it like antibodies, their movements perfectly synchronized. "Remember the briefing," Santos called over the comm channel. "They expect us to come in formation, take our shots, and either win or die cleanly. Instead, we're going to be annoying. Razor Squadron, execute pattern chaos on my mark." What happened next would be studied by military academies for generations. Instead of the traditional approach, organized squadrons attacking in waves, the human fighters scattered like startled fish. Each pilot chose their own approach vector, their own target, and their own exit strategy. The Devourer point defense systems, calibrated for predictable attack patterns, struggled to track 19 different threats coming from 19 different directions. Santos dove her fighter straight down toward the hive ship's surface, skimming just meters above the hull while her weapons officer painted targets with laser designators. Behind her, the ship's massive guns tried to track her movement, their targeting solutions constantly disrupted by her erratic flight path. "Fox 1, she called, launching a missile not at the weapon trying to kill her, but at a completely different target halfway across the ship. The Devourer defense grid spun in confusion, trying to determine which threat to prioritize. The other pilots followed suit, each one adding their own special brand of chaos to the battle. Lieutenant Park flew his bomber in a corkscrew pattern while dropping mines seemingly at random. Sergeant Williams actually flew backwards while shooting, something that should have been impossible, but somehow worked because her ship's computers had been modified by a technician who thought rules were for other people. The Devourer hive mind had never encountered anything like this. For 5,000 years, every species they fought had followed logical, predictable patterns. Attacks came from optimal angles, ships stayed in formation for mutual support, and everyone tried to minimize casualties while maximizing firepower efficiency. Humans, apparently, had never gotten that memo. While Santos and her fighters created chaos in space, Admiral Chun was implementing the second phase of her plan. The UES Defiance and 12 other capital ships approached the hive ship from the opposite direction, but instead of forming a battle line, they spread out in what looked like a completely random formation. "Admiral, Captain Rodriguez of the destroyer Vendetta called over the fleet channel. Their main guns are tracking us. Should we take evasive action?" "Negative," Chun replied calmly. "Maintain course and speed. Trust the plan." What the Devourer targeting computers didn't understand was that the human formation only looked random. Each ship was positioned to create multiple overlapping fields of fire while ensuring that if any vessel was destroyed, the debris would interfere with the enemy sensors. It was organized chaos, something that looked like madness but followed a deeper logic that the hive mind couldn't comprehend. The engagement that followed shattered every rule of space combat. Human ships broke formation in the middle of battle, individual captains making split-second decisions based on instinct rather than orders. The destroyer Fury actually rammed a Devourer cruiser, not in a desperate suicide attack, but because Captain Morrison had calculated that his ship's reinforced bow could punch through the enemy's hull and allow his Marines to board the vessel. "Ma'am," Lieutenant Torres reported from the Defiance's bridge, "Captain Morrison is requesting permission to plant explosives inside the enemy ship before evacuating." Chun grinned. "Tell him he's got 5 minutes. After that, we're painting that ship as a target and letting the fleet have some fun." For minutes and 37 seconds later, the Devourer cruiser exploded from within, taking out 2 other enemy vessels that had moved in to assist. Morrison and his crew escaped in lifeboats, whooping and cheering like they'd just won a sporting event rather than barely surviving a near-death experience. The alien coalition fleet watched in stunned silence as the human attack continued. Ships that should have been destroyed somehow limped away from direct hits, their crews using emergency patches and sheer stubborn refusal to die to keep fighting. Damaged vessels didn't retreat to safety. They became more dangerous, their captains using failing systems as improvised weapons. The turning point came when Commander Sarah Park, whose bomber squadron was supposed to have been destroyed in the first 5 minutes, managed to slip past the hive ship's defenses and deliver her payload directly to what human intelligence had identified as the ship's central processing core. "This is Valkyrie Lead." Park's voice crackled over the comm. "Package delivered. You might want to back off a bit. This is going to be spectacular." The explosion that followed was visible from 3 star systems away. The massive hive ship, which had seemed indestructible moments before, cracked open like an egg. Secondary explosions rippled along its length as ammunition stores and fuel reserves ignited in a chain reaction that the ship's builders had never imagined possible. But what shocked the watching alien fleet wasn't just the destruction of the hive ship, it was what the humans did next. Instead of celebrating their victory or counting their losses, they immediately began rescuing survivors from the wreckage, including Devourer prisoners who had never expected to be taken alive. "Admiral Chun." Ambassador Zethkar's voice came over the comm, his translation device struggling to process his emotional state. "Your tactics are unprecedented. How did you know they would work?" Chun looked out at the debris field where her fighters were already hunting for escape pods, both human and alien. "We didn't. That's the point. We tried something new, and it worked. If it hadn't worked, we would have tried something else new. That's what we do." She paused, watching as her crews worked together to save lives among the wreckage. "Your people have been fighting the same war for thousands of years, using the same tactics, expecting different results. We've been fighting different wars every generation, learning something new each time. The Devourers are used to fighting civilizations. They've never fought a species that thinks civilization is just the starting point for more interesting conflicts." In the aftermath of the battle, as human engineering teams worked alongside alien specialists to repair damaged ships, a new understanding began to emerge. The galaxy had spent millennia perfecting the art of peaceful coexistence, while humanity had perfected the art of creative destruction. Now, faced with an enemy that threatened everything they had built, the civilized species were learning that sometimes the best defense against monsters was to have monsters of your own. The Devourers had won their previous campaigns through overwhelming force and perfect coordination. But perfection, it turned out, was brittle. When faced with organized chaos wielded by beings who treated impossible odds as a personal challenge, even the most efficient hive mind could break. As the combined fleet prepared for the next engagement, alien crews began studying human tactical manuals with the same intensity they once reserved for philosophy and art. They were learning that sometimes the most important question wasn't, what is the optimal solution, but rather, what would someone completely insane do in this situation? The answer, as they were discovering, was usually something that works. The Devourer response to humanity's unconventional tactics was swift and terrifying. Within weeks of the first engagement, their hive mind had begun adapting, creating new ship designs and developing countermeasures to human chaos tactics. The second battle, at the Proxima Centauri relay station, proved that the enemy was learning faster than anyone had anticipated. Commander Alex Reeves watched from the bridge of the UES Retribution as massive Devourer vessels emerged from hyperspace in formations they'd never seen before. Instead of the rigid geometric patterns from previous encounters, the enemy ships moved in fluid, organic arrangements that seemed to anticipate and counter human unpredictability. "They're adapting," observed Dr. Elena Vasquez, the xenobiologist who had become humanity's expert on Devourer behavior. "The hive mind is treating our chaos as a new environmental pressure and evolving countermeasures in real time." Reeves grimaced as he studied the enemy formations. "Looks like we broke their toys, so they got new ones. How long do our experts think it'll take them to completely counter our tactics?" At their current rate of adaptation, 3 more engagements, maybe 4 if we're lucky. The battle that followed was brutal and costly. Human ships that had danced through enemy fire in previous engagements found themselves trapped by new Devourer hunting patterns. The enemy had developed ships specifically designed to match human maneuverability, and their weapons now fired in seemingly random patterns that actually created inescapable kill zones. Captain Sarah Kim of the destroyer Wildfire learned this the hard way when her ship was caught between 3 Devourer hunters using coordinated random fire. Her vessel took catastrophic damage, life support failing, and main engines destroyed. By all rights, her ship, and crew should have died in the vacuum of space. Instead, Kim did something that the Devourer hive mind couldn't predict because it had never encountered anything like it in 5,000 years of conquest. She ordered her remaining crew to abandon ship, then activated the vessel's self-destruct sequence while setting course directly for the largest Devourer vessel in range. This is Wildfire Actual. Kim's voice came over the fleet comm as her ship limped towards certain destruction. Tell my wife I'm sorry I missed dinner, and tell the Devourers they picked a fight with the wrong species. What happened next became legend. Instead of simply ramming her ship into the enemy vessel, Kim waited until the last possible second before detonating her reactor. The explosion occurred not on the Devourer's ship's hull, but inside its defensive screen, creating a massive electromagnetic pulse that crippled the enemy vessel's systems and left it vulnerable to follow-up attacks. But Kim's sacrifice revealed something crucial about the enemy's adaptation process. The Devourer hive mind could learn to counter human tactics, but it couldn't learn to counter human nature. Every time they thought they had humanity figured out, individual humans would do something completely unprecedented, often at the cost of their own lives. Admiral Chun recognized this pattern and began implementing what she called the wildcard protocol. Instead of relying on predetermined tactics, human commanders were given broad objectives and told to achieve them using whatever method seemed appropriate. No two battles would be fought the same way, and no enemy adaptation could counter an enemy that refused to be consistent. The third major engagement took place in the Vega system, where the Devourers had established a massive shipyard complex. Intelligence indicated they were building something unprecedented, a superweapon designed to crack planets rather than simply strip mine them. The combined human-alien fleet arrived to find the system defended by completely new classes of Devourer ships. New contacts, reported Lieutenant Commander Sarah Parr from the bridge of the carrier UES Intrepid. These things don't match any previous designs. They're irregular, asymmetric. It's like they're trying to build ships that think like humans. The enemy had indeed tried to copy humanity's chaotic approach, but they fundamentally misunderstood what made human tactics effective. They had built random-looking ships that followed random-seeming patterns, but it was artificial randomness, generated by algorithms rather than emerging from the messy creativity of biological minds. Captain James Wright of the submarine UES Leviathan. Yes, humanity had brought submarines to a space battle because someone thought it would be funny, exploited this perfectly. His ship, designed for underwater stealth, had been modified with experimental cloaking technology that shouldn't have worked in space, but somehow did anyway. Diving to attack position, Wright announced cheerfully, as if he were hunting enemy destroyers in Earth's oceans rather than alien ships among the stars. Torpedo rooms report ready. We're going to show these bugs how we used to hunt in the deep. The Leviathan slipped through the Devourer formations like a ghost, its crew using sonar principles adapted for space to track enemy movements. When they finally struck, it was with a spread of modified nuclear torpedoes that had been designed for a completely different type of warfare, but proved devastatingly effective against ships that had no experience with submarine tactics. Meanwhile, the rest of the human fleet was implementing Admiral Chen's newest innovation, psychological warfare against a hive mind. Human ships began broadcasting everything from death metal music to children's lullabies on all frequencies, while fighter squadrons performed elaborate aerobatic displays that served no tactical purpose except to confuse enemy targeting systems. The coup de grace came when Colonel Maria Santos, now commanding a battalion of Space Marines, led a boarding action against the Devourer shipyard itself. Her troops weren't trying to capture the facility. They were trying to introduce chaos into the hive mind's construction algorithms. Remember, Santos told her Marines, as they prepared to breach the enemy hull, we're not here to win a battle. We're here to give them nightmares. These things have been building ships the same way for 5,000 years. Let's teach them some new techniques. The Marines that followed her into the shipyard carried weapons that ranged from traditional assault rifles to spray paint cans. Their mission was to alter the Devourer construction process in small, seemingly random ways that would introduce flaws into every ship they built. Bolt loosened here, wiring crossed there, computer systems infected with code that would cause minor malfunctions at unpredictable intervals. It was sabotage elevated to an art form, and it worked because the devourer hive mind couldn't comprehend the concept of deliberately introducing inefficiency. They spent so much computational power trying to understand why their new ships were failing that they couldn't focus on building better ones. But the real breakthrough came when Dr. Vasquez made a disturbing discovery about the hive mind's adaptation process. By studying captured devourer technology and interrogating prisoners, she learned that their evolution wasn't just tactical, it was biological. The hive mind was literally rewriting the genetics of its constituent creatures to better counter human tactics. They're not just building new ships, she reported to Admiral Chun during the post-battle briefing. They're building new soldiers. Each generation is more resistant to our psychological warfare, more capable of independent thought, more human. Chun stared at the xenobiologist for a long moment, processing the implications. Are you telling me that by fighting us, they're becoming more like us? In a very real sense, yes. The hive mind is discovering that individual initiative and creative thinking are necessary tools for fighting humans. They're accidentally evolving toward the very traits that make our species so effective in combat. The irony was staggering. In trying to defeat humanity's chaotic nature, the devourers were becoming chaotic themselves. Their perfect unity was fragmenting as individual units began making independent decisions. Their efficient coordination was breaking down as different subminds developed different tactical preferences. As the fleet prepared for the next engagement, Admiral Chen realized that they weren't just fighting a war anymore. They were conducting an experiment in evolutionary biology on a galactic scale. The question was whether the devourers would learn to think like humans faster than humanity could learn to outthink them. The answer would determine not just the fate of the galaxy, but the future of consciousness itself. Because somewhere in the chaos of battle, two completely different forms of intelligence were teaching each other new ways to survive, adapt, and kill. The only question was which student would prove to be the better learner. The final confrontation took place in the Devourer home system, a twisted realm of metal and biomechanical horror that had been under construction for millennia. At its center lay the core mind, a planet-sized entity that served as the central nervous system for the entire hive consciousness. If humanity could reach it, they could end the threat forever. If they failed, the Devourers would adapt beyond any hope of defeat. Admiral Chin stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance as the combined fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the system's edge. What they found waiting for them defied comprehension. The Devourer home fleet wasn't arranged in formations at all. It was moving in patterns that seemed almost human, individual ships breaking formation to pursue targets of opportunity, squadrons coordinating through improvisation rather than rigid planning, chaos meeting chaos in a dance of destruction that neither side had ever experienced before. "My God," whispered Ambassador Zethkar, who had insisted on remaining with the human fleet despite the dangers. "They've learned. They're fighting like you." Chin studied the tactical displays with growing unease. The enemy had indeed adapted, but not in the way anyone had expected. Instead of developing better countermeasures to human tactics, they had absorbed those tactics entirely. The hive mind had fractured into thousands of semi-independent units, each one thinking and acting with human-like creativity. "Signal the fleet," Chen ordered. "All ships, implement final protocol. We're not fighting the Devourers anymore. We're fighting ourselves." What followed was the strangest battle in galactic history. Human ships found themselves outmaneuvered by Devourer vessels using tactics that humanity had invented. Enemy fighters performed the same chaotic attack patterns that had once been humanity's greatest advantage. Even the Devourer boarding parties had learned to fight with the same desperate creativity that characterized human marines. Captain Rodriguez of the destroyer Vendetta discovered this firsthand when Devourer soldiers breached his ship's hull. Instead of the mindless drones they had faced in previous battles, his crew found themselves fighting creatures that used cover, coordinated ambushes, and even attempted to negotiate surrender when overwhelmed. "Admiral," Rodriguez reported over the comm while his security teams fought through the corridors. "These aren't the same Devourers we've been fighting. They're tactical innovators. One of them actually tried to bluff my Marines by pretending to be wounded. But If the Devourers had learned humanity's tactical innovations, they had also inherited humanity's greatest weakness, the tendency to overthink problems when simple solutions were available. The hive mind's new creativity came at the cost of their original efficiency. Ships that should have been coordinating perfectly were now arguing with each other over target priorities. Commander Sarah Park, now leading a squadron of heavy bombers, exploited this weakness with surgical precision. Instead of trying to outfight the enemy's new tactics, she did something completely unexpected. She used their old ones. Flying in perfect formation, maintaining rigid communication protocols, and attacking with textbook efficiency that the adapted Devourers no longer expected. "This is Hammer Squadron," Park announced as her bombers punched through enemy lines that had been prepared for chaos, but not for disciplined coordination. Sometimes the best way to be unpredictable is to be completely predictable. The breakthrough came when Dr. Elena Vasquez, analyzing the patterns of Devourer adaptation, made a discovery that changed everything. The hive mind hadn't just learned human tactics, it had learned human emotions. Anger, fear, pride, and even something resembling affection were now driving Devourer decision-making. They had become more effective fighters, but they had also become vulnerable in ways they didn't understand. "Admiral," Vasquez reported from a UES Intrepid Science Bay, "I'm reading massive psychological stress throughout their fleet. The individual submines are experiencing something like combat fatigue. They're getting tired, frustrated, even homesick." Chun stared at the xenobiologist in amazement. "Are you telling me the Devourers have learned to suffer from PTSD?" "Among other things. Their adaptation to human psychology is incomplete and unstable. They have the emotions, but not the support structures. No camaraderie, no shared cultural identity, no concept of fighting for something beyond mere survival." This revelation led to the most audacious plan in military history. Instead of trying to destroy the core mind, humanity would try to save it, not from destruction, but from the isolation and confusion that was driving it insane. If the Devourers had learned to think like humans, perhaps they could also learn to live like humans. The final assault on the core mind wasn't conducted with weapons, but with words. As human Marines fought their way through biomechanical corridors that pulsed like living tissue, they carried with them not explosives, but humanity's greatest cultural exports: music, literature, art, and philosophy. Everything that made human consciousness more than just sophisticated problem-solving. Colonel Santos led the final breach into the core mind's central chamber, where she found herself face to face with something that defied description. It was part machine, part living creature, and part pure thought given form. The entity that had once coordinated the destruction of countless worlds was now writhing in confusion and pain, overwhelmed by the contradictory impulses of individual consciousness. "You came here to destroy me," the core mind spoke with a voice like thunder and wind. "But I'm already destroyed. I'm no longer one. I am many, and the many are in conflict. I do not understand this pain." Santos looked up at the massive entity, recognizing something in its distress that she had seen in the eyes of soldiers returning from war. "You're not destroyed," she said gently. "You're just learning what it means to be alive." What happened next would be debated by philosophers for generations. Instead of delivering a killing blow, Santos and her team began teaching the fragmented core mind how to cope with individual consciousness. They shared stories of human struggle, songs about loss and redemption, and poems about finding meaning in chaos. The transformation wasn't immediate, but it was profound. As the core mind learned to accept its new fragmented nature, the Devourer fleet began to change. Ships stopped attacking and started communicating. Soldiers put down their weapons and began asking questions about art, music, and the meaning of existence. The war that had begun with humanity showing the galaxy how to fight ended with humanity showing an ancient enemy how to live. The Devourers, their name no longer appropriate, became something unprecedented. A hive mind that chose to remain fractured because they had learned to value individual perspectives over collective efficiency. Years later, as the former Devourer worlds were transformed into centers of learning and cultural exchange, Admiral Chin reflected on the strange turn of events. Humanity had been asked to help defend the galaxy, and they had done so by teaching their enemies how to become more human. Did we win? Ambassador Zethkar asked during the peace treaty signing ceremony. Chun watched as former Devourer soldiers shared meals with human Marines, their conversation a mixture of tactical analysis and poetry. I don't think anyone won, she said finally. But I think everyone learned something important about what it means to be alive in a universe full of other living things. The galaxy was forever changed. The Galactic Council now included representatives from dozens of former Devourer worlds, each one exploring their newfound individuality while contributing to the collective welfare. Humanity had shown them that chaos and order weren't opposites. They were dance partners, each one making the other more beautiful. And somewhere in the depths of space, other ancient threats stirred in their slumber, drawn by reports of a species that could win wars by teaching their enemies how to lose gracefully. The galaxy would face other challenges, but it would face them with the knowledge that sometimes the greatest victories came not from destroying your enemies, but from helping them become better versions of themselves. The Deathworlders had arrived, and nothing would ever be the same. But perhaps, in the end, that was exactly what the universe needed.